starting with verse 24, says this: "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." Let's stop and pray. Lord, I pray that you would open our eyes today to what we need to know, that you would work in us to complete us, to be what you've made us to be. We thank you, Lord. Amen. Amen. Don't you know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Paul says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Paul understood a basic concept in communication. Communication only works if the people who are receiving your communication can personally, emotionally identify with what you've said. You ever sat and read something? You read the whole thing, you read every word, you got done, you put it down, you said, I have no idea what I just read. It just didn't strike you in such a way. It didn't make an emotional connection with you so that you could understand what's in there. I've been in school a long time. I have read a lot of textbooks. I can't tell you what's in any of them because there's no emotional connection. It just doesn't matter. So to make an emotional connection and to make communication matter, a good communicator uses a lot of analogies and pictures and stories. Jesus told lots of parables to help people understand things. Paul continuously comes back to little word pictures like this one. One of Paul's favorite word pictures continuously, again and again, has to do with sports, with athletics. Don't you know, he says to these Corinthians, that in a race all the runners run? Paul is not a running coach. He is communicating very different things to us in this section than has anything to do with athletics. He's talking in chapters 8 and 9 and 10 about our freedom and our rights as Christians. The fact that we're not under the law, the Old Testament law that says we have to follow certain practices to be acceptable to God. We no longer are under that sort of thing. We've been given the grace of Christ. We're free, but in our freedom, he tells us again and again, we have to make sure that others have the opportunity to see Christ. That we don't use our freedom in such a way that gets in the way of others seeing Christ. In the midst of that discussion, he pauses for 3 verses for this little analogy. Don't you know that in a race all the runners run? An athletic analogy, a sporting analogy. And that's something that should make perfect sense to each one of us, because if ever there were a place that sports were idolized, it's right here in the great US of A. Did you know that this weekend over 150 million people in the United States will watch a major sporting activity? 150 million. To put that in context, there are 330 million people in the United States, many of whom are too young to watch sporting events, some who just don't care, and yet half of the United States will be watching sports. Count out the blind people, they're not going to watch. They might listen. Half of the United States will be watching sporting activities. The United States, every year, the people of the United States, the individual households, not corporate sponsors, not big stadiums, but individual households in the United States in 2017 spent $123.6 billion watching major league sports. $123.6 billion. 55.6 of that was spent just going to games. Just buying tickets to go to major league games. The households in the United States in 2020 spent $30 billion on youth sports, where you don't have to buy tickets. They still spent $30 billion on sports for kids aged 5 to 17. That's a lot of money. By the end of the decade, that's expected to grow to $77 billion. We like our sports here. 23% of Americans say that they are avid sports fans. The way that we would define an avid sports fan is someone who fashions their life schedule around sports. They make sure that they're available for the right events. They schedule their work and their social activities around the opportunities to go to these events. They'll stop what they're doing to be part of a sporting event. If their team wins, they're great. If their team loses, they're depressed. They are avid sports fans, deeply involved in sports year-round. 23%, about a quarter of the United States, says that basically their life revolves around the athletics that they're a part of. An additional 40-something%, it adds up to 65. I can't do the math in my head this morning. An additional 40-odd% claim that they are not necessarily avid sports fans, but they're still sports fans. They still watch the games they want to watch. They're still involved in the things that they want to do. They might not schedule their life around it, but you better be sure if the game's on TV or on the radio or whatever, they're going to catch it. And if they have an opportunity to be part of it, they're going to be a part of it. That leaves 35% of Americans who say, I'm really not a sports fan at all. But if you interview that 35%, they still watch 1 or 2 games a year. And if somebody says, hey, I got a ticket to the baseball park on Friday, you want to go? They'll still go. 35% of Americans aren't really sports fans, but they'll stop what they're doing to go to the game if they've got a free ticket. We like our sports. It could be said of the people in the United States that they work all day and watch sports all evening. Not too unlike the Corinthians. Actually, in Corinth, sports were a really big deal. Athletics might actually have been a bigger deal to them than they are to us. It was said of the Corinthians that a good Corinthian man does nothing all day and watches sports all evening. That's what they do. They had there, just outside of Corinth, this facility that I'm showing you the ruins of. It was a big sporting complex, a gymnasium, a big track, and right in the middle of it was a temple dedicated to Poseidon. And there at this place where these ruins are, they held the Isthmian Games every 2 years. Second only to the Olympics in their poll in the Roman Empire were these Isthmian Games every 2 years. The most popular of the Isthmian Games were foot races, chariot races, wrestling, and boxing. It was a big deal. People came from all over the empire to watch these games. People came from all over the empire to compete in these games. Such a big deal was it to the people of this region that at 7 years old, all little boys and all little girls began physical education training. You see, the people of the Hellenistic world, what we would call Macedonia and Greece today, the people of the Hellenistic world believed that a child should grow up to be beautiful in mind and in body, and that athletics were a major part of creating that beauty of mind and body, boys and girls. It was thought that if the girls were beautiful of mind and body, that they would produce more beautiful children. One of the major sports that girls were involved in was wrestling. Yes, the girls did a lot of wrestling, as well as foot races, chariot races, and musicianship, which was considered an athletic pursuit at that time, learning to master an instrument and sing. And the boys, of course, would train for all of these various things. And as they trained, they would be separated out into one of 3 things. Either someone who, quite frankly, wasn't all that good at it. They would be still expected to be beautiful of form, if at all possible. But there was no career for them in physical pursuits. Let's put them into a trade. Let's make them a craftsman. And then there were people who were incredibly good at these physical pursuits. They were really strong, or they were really fast, or they were really good at strategy, but really not good at all 3. Those people were sent to the military. Those boys who were really fast or really strong or really good at strategy could go into the military and serve the Roman army with power and vigor. Those few that were beautiful of form and of mind and were fast and were strong and were good at strategy, the very few, the absolute 1% cream at the crop, they were pulled out to be professional athletes. And they would give their lives to these athletic pursuits. It is very likely that Paul, while in Corinth, attended at least one showing of the Isthmian Games, watching these professional athletes do what nobody else in the world could do quite like them. And so when he's talking to the Corinthian people and he's trying to find a way to pound home to them the need to be focused on Christ in their lives and not on themselves and not on other people, but to be focused on Christ, when he's looking for an analogy that they're going to understand, of course he goes to sports. Everybody in Corinth understood sports. He thought about the vast arena and how these Corinthians would sit and watch these races. And he said to them, don't you know that in a race, in a foot race, all the runners run? Duh, they all run. But only one gets a prize. Run in such a way as to get the prize. Run like a winner. That might seem kind of silly at first. Run in such a way. I mean, aren't all of them competing for the prize? Maybe. Maybe. I find that we don't all compete for the prize. Many of us are convinced we're just not going to win. That's one of the things I really like about NASCAR. You didn't think I could possibly use sports in an analogy with not bringing up auto racing, right? That's one of the things I really like about NASCAR. Depending on the track, there are between 38 and 43 cars on every track. That's between 38 and 43 teams. One winner, 42 losers, you understand. It's not like football, where like 1,600 overpaid men come for this team and 1,600 overpaid men come for that team, and so you've got 1,600 winners and 1,600 losers. That's not how it works. You've got one winner and everyone else loses. Every week. Some of these guys go to the track every week and never win. Every week. And it's not just one car and one driver. It's not even one car, one driver, and a pit crew. There are teams, the smallest of the NASCAR teams are 20 to 30 people. The larger teams could be as many as 600 people dedicated to one car winning. And a lot of people losing. I saw a great interview of a popular driver who never wins. And this person was being interviewed by a media person and by a former driver who was now working for the media outlet. And they were asking this person about their chances and these kinds of things. And his answer was, hey man, I got a fast car this weekend. Team's been working really hard. We got a really good shot this weekend. You better watch out for me. I'm coming in first. And the media person, as politely as she possibly could, tried to ask him how he could think that, since normally he came in 30th. How could he possibly think that this was the week that he was going to come in first? And he just said it again, I got the best car. I'm the best driver. I know we can win this week. You better watch out for me. They flashed back to the studio, and here was the former driver, now a media guy, and she turned to him and said, man, he really thinks he's going to win. And the former driver said, you bet he does. He wouldn't show up if he didn't. He said, every single one of these guys is absolutely convinced that they're going to win and that they're going to win this week. Every single one of those guys is convinced they finally have the formula right. They finally have the team right. They finally have the car right. They finally figured out how to drive it right. Every one of those guys is convinced. He said, believe me, you don't want to be there on the day that a guy shows up not thinking he's going to win, because he's already defeated. The minute he shows up and says, well, we're not going to win this week, the best we can hope for is the top 20, he's already defeated. He has no chance. He's no fun to watch. He's no fun to be around. I guarantee you he'll crash out at the beginning of the race and end at the back of the pack. And the guy's absolutely right. In order to even have a chance, these guys have to be convinced that they're going to win. This is what Paul tells to Timothy. He says, train yourself in godliness, for the training of the body has limited benefit. But godliness is beneficial in every way, since it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. This saying is trustworthy and deserves full acceptance. For this reason, we labor and strive, because we have put our hope in the living God, who is the Savior of all people, especially of those who believe. We labor and strive because we put our hope in God. We know we're going to win. You ever seen a defeated Christian? one who says it ain't going to get no better. Paul says, don't do that. Listen, we're all running this race, this human race, this race of life. We're all running this race of Christianity. Run like somebody who's going to win. Dedicate yourself to it. Plan on it. Give everything you can into winning. Don't you know that in a race they all run? You've seen the guy who wins. He doesn't give up. Be like him, Paul says. And then he goes on and he says, I've got a little more complete in here. He says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. I guess it's the same. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. You knew what he was talking about because there in Corinth, the athletes that were going to compete in next year's Isthmian Games would show up no later than 10 months before the games, simply so they could train on Corinthian dirt, at Corinthian altitude, in the Corinthian stadium and gymnasium, so that they could be fully prepared for the games. And you remember what Corinth was like. We've talked about this a lot. I mean, it was Vegas of the ancient world. I mean, anything the guys could want. 1,000 temple prostitutes of Aphrodite available to them at any time, night or day. Anything that they wanted to eat or drink. All of the wealth and opulence of the Roman world at their fingertips. And these guys were superstars. They were major household names. They were Michael Jordan of the ancient world. Everybody knew who these guys were. And if they walked through downtown Corinth, they'd have girls falling all over them, giving them all kinds of stuff just to spend the evening with them. So when these guys came to Corinth, they shut that all out. They went up onto the Poseidon's Hill and locked themselves in so that they would not be distracted by the things around them, so that they could focus on their training. Came across an article about a guy whose name I can just really not pronounce. He's French. His first name is Patrick, I can tell you that. He is one of the major coaches for professional tennis. He has coached professional tennis players from 6th place in the world to 1st place in the world over and over and over again. Big, major tennis name. As he has gotten out of the daily coaching duties, he started a training facility in Cannes, France. You know where that is, French Riviera, beautiful place. The film festival, Cannes Film Festival, major touristy area. Everything that anyone could ever want to do right there. Tennis players come from around the world to train at his compound that you can see up here. When they get there, some of them are awed by the city, the beautiful surroundings, all of the various activities that they could be involved in. But when they go to the training center, they go through a set of gates and don't leave. They live at the training, they sleep at the training center, they eat at the training center. All they do is train. They get up early in the morning and they go to the gym. And they don't do all the exercises you or I might do. They do very specific exercises designed to help the very specific movements that are part of their tennis game. They stop for lunch, and then in the afternoon they play tennis, but they don't play for fun. They'll do the same swing and the same ball over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until their coach changes it up, and then they'll do a different swing and a different ball over and over and over and over and over again all day long, nothing but training and learning how to do tennis. This article that I came across was written by a lady who was a junior, not a professional, but the next level below professional. She was a pretty good junior and wanted to see if she could be even better and maybe make the pros. She was also a journalist, so she thought, this is how I'll pay for my time at tennis. I'll write it all about. Well, she managed to have an interview with this guy, Patrick, whose name that I can't really say because I'm not French. And she asked him about what it was like being there, and some of his answers are just so fantastic. One of the things he said is, some people who come want a little improvement here or there. They just want to get a little bit better. But some people are prepared to lose in order to gain in the future, like you. They're prepared to lose beforehand, but because they want to completely change the technique to, in the future, get better at it. It's a very courageous thing to do that, because it's not easy to go backwards to have a chance to jump farther than before. She said when she got there, she was holding her racket like she had been trained to hold it, doing a pretty good job. She'd been doing this for 20 years. I mean, this was pretty, the grip that she had was pretty well ingrained, pretty much muscle memory. The coach said, if you want to get better, you're going to have to use a different grip. Oh, do I need to move a finger or something? No, he says, you're going to have to use a completely and totally different grip. You're going to have to absolutely, completely forget what you've learned about that and learn a completely and totally new kind of grip if you want to get better. She said it felt like suicide. It felt like her arm was on fire. But eventually, through her 3 months there, as she began adopting this new grip, she could see that it was going to make her better in the future. This is what he's saying. If you want to gain, sometimes you have to lose. Sometimes you have to set aside what you know. You have to lock yourself in, focus on this, forget about the things outside of training, focus on the things inside of training. Take a few steps back, and you'll get better. The writer of Hebrews tells us this in Hebrews chapter 12. He says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off every hindrance and the sin that so easily entangles, and let's run with perseverance this race marked out for us. Throwing aside everything that hinders, every distraction from the world, everything that might tangle around our feet. That's that concept of the seed that grows up in the thorns. Throw aside those things of the world and focus on Christ, the author and perfecter of our faith. What did Christ do? He went into strict training. Do you remember his time in the desert? The 40 days that he fasted and spent time in the desert. Why was he fasting? He was fasting to teach his body, to teach his flesh, that there was something much more important, that the Spirit was much more important. It seems that he meditated on Deuteronomy the whole time he was there. Don't know why he picked that book, but it seemed to work for him. He meditated on Deuteronomy the whole time he was there, on the law that God had given Moses in Deuteronomy. And when Satan came to tempt him with the temptations that are common to man, temptations that we really need to take care of ourselves first, that we really need to make sure that we are strong and healthy before we take care of anybody else. Temptations that says, look out for number one and take care of your needs. Temptations that say, there is an easier way. There is an easier way than the hard way of faith. There's an easier way to get through life. Temptations that say, you could be famous. I could make you famous. Everybody would know who you are and everybody would think you're great. He was able to say, no, I'm not interested in those things. I've been going through strict training that has taught me that man doesn't live on bread alone and that man should only worship Christ or only worship God alone. Strict training that he had submitted himself to, pushing aside the things of the world, focused on the prize in the end, focused on the future. Let's fix our eyes on him. Let's do it the way that he does it. Willing to give up a bit to move forward in the future. This is what Paul told the Corinthians. He said, let's make sure that we run like we're going to win. Let's make sure that we commit ourselves to strict training. And then he says, those who go into strict training do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. You've seen the pictures of the Roman competitors or the Greek competitors and the leaves on their head. It's just a little wreath. We say it was a wreath made out of laurels. Originally, it was actually a wreath made out of pine, I found out. Pine was rare and kind of expensive and very fragrant, and so originally they made these wreaths out of pine, but they were really expensive because they were really pretty rare, and so they switched not to laurel, but to celery. You ever seen celery go to seed? The stalks get real narrow and it gets really leafy. I actually pulled some out of the garden yesterday. That stuff is really bendy. You can do just about anything with it. So they took essentially useless celery to make these wreaths that they would give to people if they won. People who spent their entire life training for this race. They gave everything they had, nearly killed themselves in these races just to finish the race. They win the race, and they get useless celery on their head. They do all of this work to win a prize. Oh, but come on, their name's in the W column, right? They won, and you can never take that away from them. They're a champion, and that'll never go away. Really? You guys know the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, right? Once. 2015. Did you guys know that? Does that matter? That was 7 years ago. You know how they've done since then? Not very good. They've made the divisional playoffs twice, but got booted out in the first round. That's how well they've done since their 1 year. They did really well. Nobody can take that away from them. They were champions. That ring on their finger, they could sell it at a pawn shop for like $250. Nobody can take that away from them. Come on, it doesn't last. The prizes that are available to us in the world, they just don't last. We work so hard to earn things that are nothing but celery on our head. Paul says you need to compete for a crown that will last forever. What's he talking about there? Well, there's a number of crowns that are mentioned in the New Testament. Peter says, when the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive the unfading crown of glory. You'll get glory from Christ. Paul says there's reserved for me the crown of righteousness, the reward of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but to all of us who have longed for his appearing. James says, blessed is the one who endures trials, because when he stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. That's a crown that's mentioned multiple times in the book of Revelation. Oh, people say to me, I don't care about that. I just, hey man, I'm saved. I put my faith in Christ. I know I can't save myself. I'm going to let him save me. I'll be fine. I don't need to worry about getting any rewards or anything. Paul said there will be some people like that who build their lives out of paper and toothpicks. And on that day when we stand before Christ and all of our work is judged before him, it's not that we're not saved. Oh no, Paul says you're saved, but you're kind of saved like one coming out of the fire. You smell like smoke. Everything you had got burned up. Oh, you're in, but you're in naked and burnt. Do you really want to be like that? Paul says, no, you need to work to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. Like the story Jesus tells about the guy who leaves his servants with talents. 5 talents, which is a big amount of silver for one, 2 talents, which is a pretty big amount of silver for another, and 1 talent for another guy, based on what they could do. And the guy who had 5 invested and made 10, and the guy who had 2 invested and had 4, and the guy who had 1, he didn't do a thing. And the master comes back and says to the guy with 5, how'd you do? And he says, here's my 10. And the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. Oh, you'll be in charge of many. Luke says they were cities. That Jesus told the same story another time and said they were cities. A man who had been put in charge to 5 cities did such a good job that the master said, now you can have 10. Interestingly enough, the guy who had been put in charge of 2 that made 4 talents, Jesus gave the exact same words to him. He didn't say, hey, you did pretty good taking that 2 and making it 4. But this other guy, he took 5 and made 10. So you did good, but not as good as him. No, he looked at him who had doubled what he had and said the exact same words. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Same thing with the guy with the city. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. That's what you want to hear. Well done, good and faithful servant. You don't want to hear like the guy who only had 1 and didn't even try. And he says, you wicked, lazy servant. I trusted you. You didn't run to win. You didn't train. You didn't even try. You don't want to hear that. You know, I find it really interesting that the guy with 5 and the guy with 2 were equal in the sight of God. You know what it tells me? It tells me that we're not competing against each other. Isn't that nice? You don't have to compete with Billy Graham. When you stand before Christ, how you handled the life that he gave you is all you're going to be judged on. Oh, we can all win. Oh, you might not be as fast as another guy, but you can win just as well. But you see, this isn't one of those everybody gets a trophy kind of races. You are in competition, Paul tells us. But who are you in competition with? Here's what he tells us. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I don't fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body to make it a slave, so that after I preach to others, I myself won't be disqualified from the prize. You're competing against your own flesh. These words that Paul uses are fantastic. This is as close as I could get to it out of the Greek. I bruise my body. What he's talking about, boxers would box a game of submission. It wasn't a knockout punch you were looking for or points you were looking for. The Greek boxers, when they would box until one guy said, I can't take anymore, I'm out. That's what they're looking for, is that boxer to raise his hand and say, I'm done. And one of the quickest ways to make your opponent raise his hand and say, I'm done, is to give him two black eyes. A shot here and a shot here. First of all, he's hardly going to be able to stand. He'll get so dizzy so quickly because of what the sinuses do. And then as his eyes begin to swell, they'll actually shut. He can't see. He can't fight anymore. He has no balance. He has limited vision. He can't fight anymore. And so a boxer who got hit in both of these places knows he better get out of there now or he's going to be hurt badly. Paul says, it more literally says in the Greek, I give myself two black eyes. He doesn't mean he literally is punching himself in the face. What he's saying is, I treat my flesh in such a way that it's willing to submit. We go around, man, we got to satisfy the flesh. We got to make our bodies happy. We got to make our flesh happy. He says, no, that's not what we need to make happy. The spirit is what needs to be made happy. The flesh is going to have to come in third. Spirit, mind, body in third. So I make my body submit. I work it, I train it until it will submit, and I can use it as my slave. Rather than the body saying, you've got to do what I need, I can say to the body, hey, listen, I got bigger pursuits. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to take care of me. And then he says this interesting phrase. He says, so that I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. One more sporting analogy, and then we'll be done. You might remember this race. If you are an Olympic fan, this was 1984, the Olympics in Los Angeles. Mary Decker and Zola Budd racing in the 3,000-meter race. Mary Decker was the highest-ranked racer in the United States at the time. She was fully expected to take gold in the 1980 Olympics, which we boycotted because they were in Russia. She had a number of injuries between 80 and 84, but when she came to the 84 Olympics, the hopes of America were pinned on her gold medal 3,000-meter race. Really, she had virtually no competition. Nobody was even close to as fast as she was, except for a brand new upstart, just 18, a girl named Zola Budd out of South Africa who couldn't run for South Africa because of the whole apartheid thing, so she ran for the United Kingdom. She also ran barefoot. You can see in the picture there she has no shoes on. When she was 12 years old, she ran a marathon in 3 hours and 19 minutes after only training up to 12 miles. She was the fastest endurance racer possibly on the planet. And Mary Decker knew that there was only one person she needed to beat, and it was Zola Budd. They took off for the 3,000-meter race and managed to be just like this for almost the entire race. Pace for pace, Mary Decker just ever so slightly ahead of Zola Budd. Mary Decker in lane 1, Zola Budd in lane 2. And then on the home stretch, this happened. You see Mary Decker falling down? Nobody's entirely sure exactly what happened, but it seems that as they came around the corner, Zola Budd just kind of lost control a little bit. She hadn't been training as long as Mary, and she just didn't quite have the level of physical control that Mary Decker had. And as a result, she ventured into Mary Decker's lane a little bit. She squeezed her just a little bit. Nobody is entirely sure if Zola Budd tripped Mary Decker, or, as you could see from the bare feet on Zola Budd afterwards, if Mary Decker, the front of Mary Decker's shoes actually caught on Zola Budd's heel. Nobody's exactly sure. But there on the home stretch, Mary Decker fell down and lost. Now, at that time, Zola Budd was way out in the lead. This picture's a little bit misleading. She was way out in the lead. All she needed to do was cross the finish line, and she won gold. But she didn't. Right then and there, she just stopped. Oh, she finished the race. She walked across the finish line. She came in 7th of 8 racers, with Mary Decker being last. Asked why she didn't keep going and get the gold, She said, because I knew at that moment I was disqualified. I couldn't control my own flesh. I couldn't control my own body appropriately. And as a result, another runner fell. And so even if I had come across the line first by a mile, I would get no prize. I was disqualified. Paul says, I work and train and focus on Christ so that my own body will not be a problem for me, so that my own body won't take over, so that I can focus on real prizes, eternal prizes that last, and so that my contention with my own flesh won't cause another believer to trip, so that I won't be disqualified. He says, I can go out and preach to millions and lead millions to Christ, but if my own contention with my own flesh, if I can't control my own body, and because of the choices I make and the stupid things I do, I lead another one to stumble and fall, then I'll be disqualified for any prize. Interesting warning. He tells us, Christian people, you need to quit fooling around in the starting blocks and run like you're going to win, knowing that you can win this thing, that you can hear from Christ, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you faithful over many, for all eternity being faithful to God. He says, you need to run like you're going to win. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to be in strict training, and that's going to mean shutting the world off and not letting it in, not being wooed away by the things of the world. Because if you're wooed away by the things of the world, your flesh will win over you, and you'll fail. And Lord, help you should you cause another to trip and be disqualified. Oh, you might still be saved, but you'll be snatched out of the fire. An interesting message and warning that Paul gives us, and something that we can apply to our own lives so well, even if we have never run a foot race. We need to be focused on the eternal and running to win. I wonder if, like me when I was studying this, if this has caused you to realize that there are areas in your life that are very dangerous, where you are not focused on eternal things. You're just focused on taking care of yourself right now, and it could trip another. Maybe you would take a moment as we close and just focus your heart on Him and say, Lord, I need to leave that thing behind. Maybe you would say, I'm not entirely sure that He's going to snatch me out of the flames. Maybe you need to take a moment and just call on Him. Let's pray.